evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's study session. Agendas for study sessions. Oh, excuse me, I have the Zoom on and I was echoing. Better? Is that better? Okay, sorry. Um, Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes one presentation, one development update, and 3 study session items. Seeing there are no concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there will not be any public comment. You can watch the study session live on Channel 8 and through video streaming on broomfield.org/council meetings. For our hard of hearing residents present, we have wireless headsets available in the back of the council chambers from our AV team. Before we begin tonight's agenda, I want to introduce everyone to a new feature in Broomfield's agenda management portal that will notify you when city council agendas are published or updated. To subscribe, simply go to the agenda management portal on our website, hit the agendas tab, enter your email address, and select the notify me button. You'll begin getting notifications directly to your email inbox as soon as the next agenda has been published or updated. Visit the City Council meetings webpage for instructions on how to sign up. Notifications will begin being sent out starting with next week's agenda. The very first item tonight is a presentation from 2 members of our Broomfield Teen Council who acted as youth delegates at the National League of Cities 2025 Congressional City Conference in Washington, D.C. Samara and Audrey, would you please come up to the podium, introduce yourselves, and share your presentation with us?
Hi, I'm Audrey Hendershot,
Hi, I'm Samara Ziadi.
and we were the youth delegates at the conference in DC, and we wanted to tell you guys a little bit about it.
There's 5 slides of that.
Okay. So at the conference, the attendees were Mayor Castriota, Councilmember James Marsh-Holson, Councilmember Austin Ward, Councilmember Jean Lim, Dean Bennett, myself, and Samara. So on day 1 of the conference, we attended the opening session where we got to hear Vice President J.D. Vance speak. This was a really great experience for us to see the perspectives of both sides of our country, and we also got to hear from lots of other politicians on things that are going on in their areas. Also on day 1, we did some sightseeing, so we saw some monuments, visited lots of interesting sites, and we ended the day with dinner and ice cream with our group. On day 2, we started the day with a Capitol visit with the entire group. We had a lunch where we got to hear our representatives speak, which is a great opportunity to, again, hear the differing perspectives of everyone in our state and what they're all working on.
So on day 2, we got to go and we got to see the Representative Diana DeGutti, Jason Crow, Jonah Goose, Lauren Bovart, and Gabe Evans speak. That was a very interesting thing that we got to be a part of and witness. Next slide. So then after the first Capitol visit that we had with our lunch and we got to see the representatives speak, we spent day 2 sightseeing. We visited the Capitol's reflecting pond, and then we also got to visit the botanical gardens. We visited the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, MLK's Memorial, Jefferson's Memorial, and the National Mall, where we got to visit the spot of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Sorry. So on day 3, we were fortunate enough to have breakfast with all of the Colorado representatives. And after 30 minutes of visiting, Senators Hickenlooper and Bennett were there to talk about current events. Specifically, I asked Senator Bennett a question about youth mental health in Colorado. He gave a very thoughtful answer that made me feel very heard, and I was very happy to know that he is so supportive of youth mental health initiatives in Colorado. After the breakfast, we got to, sorry. After the breakfast, we got to visit Congresswoman Peterson's office, and we got to hear about what's going on right now in our government. When Trump's administration signed the executive order to eliminate the Department of Education, we were actually in the Congresswoman's office. Then we got to cross under the tunnel that connects the building, all of the government buildings. And we got to cross that tunnel and go between her building and the Capitol. Sorry. Next. Oh, sorry. I totally. Once we got back to the Capitol, we got a formal tour by Congresswoman Peterson's aide, and then we wrapped up the day with a visit to the Holocaust Museum. Okay, now the thank you side. Sorry about that. We would just like to express our gratitude to the city of Broomfield, Broomfield City Council, Mayor Castriata, Kelly Coleman. Is she in here? Yes. Danae Broliard, did I pronounce her? Okay. And Dean Bennett for giving us this amazing opportunity of a lifetime that we will never forget. It was a great way to end our senior year.
Oh, thank you both
you.
so
Thank you.
much. Thanks, y'all. It was great having them there. It really was. And they got to have a front row seat to everything that was going on at the time. I'm glad they were with us. So, I am grateful for their serving as teen council members as well. Their engagement, leadership, and thoughtful contributions are a true reflection of the strength and promise of Broomfield's young leaders. By representing our community on a national stage, they brought their voices to important conversations, but also inspired others with their commitment to civic life. They left already, but thank you for showing up. All right, so our next item on the agenda is an update on the Center Street at Baseline Development Project from Kyle Harris of McWhinney Real Estate LLC and General Manager for the Baseline Development. Before we hear the update, I'd like to remind council that the Center Street project is in the development review process, meaning an application for a final plat and site development plan has been submitted. So this matter is in a quasi-judicial status. For the public, that means tonight's presentation is a time for council and the community to hear the developer's update. It's not a concept review where council gives feedback on proposed design and uses, and it's not the formal hearing. As the judge on land use applications, council is restricted from having conversations about this project and making a decision about this project until that public hearing. The hearing on this application is expected in the fall of this year. Further information on quasi-judicial proceedings can be found on the city's website. So now, Mr. Harris, would you please go ahead and start your update?
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Kyle Harris with McWhinney. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. Great to be here to give you an update. And maybe I got my signals ever so slightly crossed, but we were actually going to present just a little more general update on Baseline as well as Center Street. In addition to Center Street. So that's what we'll finish off. Also with me this evening is Amanda Steinley. She's with McWhinney, and she's the one who is leading the charge on all the vertical efforts for Center Street District. All right, next slide, please. Before we jump into some of the specifics, I just felt compelled to make a few comments on the Butterfly Pavilion. There have been a number of I would say we've heard some rumors about the Butterfly Pavilion and why they are no longer at Baseline. And Kyle, what did you do? Did you kick them out? And I want to make sure that we set the record straight. No, we did not cause them to leave. Quite frankly, the Butterfly Pavilion is something I've taken a personal interest in, invested a lot of time to bring that organization to Baseline. So we were very disappointed. We understand the reason why they elected not to move over, but we were pretty disappointed about that. That having been said, I want to also make it very clear that Baseline is still 100% committed to the pollinator district, to the conservational ethos that is implied by the pollinator district. And we still have a representative from the Butterfly Pavilion on our design review board to keep us accountable for this commitment to the pollinator district. So we still think they are a fabulous organization. And as a matter of fact, I just saw in the Denver Business Journal, I believe they just announced a new CEO. I think it's Ryan Welch, if I have it correctly. I literally just saw that before coming over here. So we're really excited to continue the relationship with them. All right, so what you see on the map here reflects in green projects, construction that's actually currently going on, and in the red is represents projects that are coming very quickly. So the green Parkside West Phase 3, that infrastructure is it's going in as we speak, and we anticipate going vertical later on this summer. Similarly, the Southlands infrastructure is being installed, and we anticipate going vertical there later on this summer. Those are both residential projects. Circled or I guess bounded in the red is a next phase of residential, the final phase of residential, with the exception of Center Street on the west side of the linear park. That's Parkside West Phase 4. We're hopeful of transacting on that land before the end of the year. Construction will begin first quarter of next year. Moving on to Linear Park Phase 3, that sort of odd looking shape was my best attempt at reflecting where we're going to be doing the next phase of development, the next layer of development within the linear park, and more on that in just a moment. And then, of course, Center Street District, something that we have been working on for a long time, as most of you know. Really excited about the progress that we've been able to make on that. Next slide, please. Real quickly, for those who are interested, just a quick update on infrastructure. This is a project that has been going on entirely too long, but we are nearing the end. This is 160th and Sheridan Road. We need to finish the intersection, and at the advice of city staff, they said, maybe lay off on closing that intersection once Prospect Ridge Academy closes. We think that's great advice, so we're going to do that. In the May timeframe, the closure will be for 7 days, so we can do some needed improvements. Then there will be a 6-week time period during which we conduct some other improvements in the median of Sheridan, and then we can open up the road to those 4 lanes of traffic, which will be in its finished state. One thing I didn't include here, but another piece of infrastructure I think Baseline residents have mentioned they'd really like to see, and that is a signal, a light signal at 167th. So that is going to be going in this summer as well. Should be operational by the end of July. Next slide. This is just to give council just some visuals on some of the accomplishments that have already occurred at Baseline as it relates to the public realm. We finished the quad, and by the way, all these are on the east side of Sheridan Road. So we finished the quad, the big green. I think these shots were taken at the end of last year. Next slide. And then the little green, as you may recall, we like connecting these pocket parks with garden ways. And so, the public realm is an important component to the whole story and vision of what we're doing at Baseline. A more recent photo, heard talk about the VooNerf. It actually is coming to life. And so what you see there is a dusk shot of the VooNerf lit up, and we're really excited. I think this summer we're going to see homes going up on either side of that. So it's really going to set that off nicely, we believe. Next slide. All right, coming soon, this will be submitted to the city. I think it is going to be this summer, but the idea is that we're looking to break ground on this first quarter of next year. This is that next layer of amenity within the linear park. And I have a little more detail on what we anticipate these to look like. So this is how it lays out. It's just to the south and the west of the big green. And Center Street District, by way of comparison, is to the north and the east, sort of on the upper side. Southlands to the south and the west. But next slide, please. All right, this being a regional play facility, we want there to be something meaningful, even I think iconic is sometimes overused, but we do want something that makes a statement here from a playground perspective. These are some initial ideas that are more representative. It will not exactly look like this. We're still playing with some ideas, but one of the things we've heard from our homeowners is that, yeah, this is great, but also make sure that there is something for all ages. So we're looking to make sure that this is a regional play that all our kiddos can enjoy. Next slide, please. This might be my favorite aspect of the whole thing. We're looking to do a climbing wall. It sort of mirrors some of the Canyonlands you can see. Not too high, so it's got the safety aspect in there, but really, really excited about this element to be part of the overall plan. Next slide. And then having an area for picnics, restrooms to serve the overall linear park. This is part of the plan as well. Next slide. And so that is coming very soon. And as I mentioned, looking forward to getting that out of the ground starting in January, hopefully January of next year. Now on to Center Street. And again, because we are quasi-judicial, we're not going to be talking about all the elements of Center Street, but rather giving an update on where we are in the process. So the good news is, and there's a lot of good news. Well, even before I get there, I wanted to mention how we are submitting. We have what we call the horizontal infrastructure. There is a promenade piece. That's a regional piece of infrastructure. Then there is what we call the in-tract infrastructure. Both of those are going as separate submittals. We have already gone through 2 submittal processes with the city and are on the verge of going through those 3rd processes. In addition to that, we have our first phase of the vertical, which is the retail. And we anticipate that, Amanda assures me, we're getting that submitted Thursday of this week. So that process will begin as well. And the comment at the bottom of this, I think, is very important, and a sincere thank you to city staff. They have been excellent to work with in helping us meet some really tight timelines on a complicated process and getting it through. So just want to say you guys have been doing a great job and we really appreciate it. Next slide. Oh, apologies for the eye test. I think what I will focus in on, what's really important, it's the second bar, the brown one that says construction horizontal. That is super important for us because that is when we anticipate getting shovels in the ground, getting going, and that is a prerequisite for a number of the other bars that you see. The retail construction, which will be the next thing actually coming up out of the ground, followed by we got 2 flavors of residential that we're anticipating. And then you can see a little further underneath retail where it says WF, that's a Whole Foods, core and shell, that's a grocery store construction. But all of that is predicated on our getting the construction going, which we anticipate that first quarter of next year. We need enough time to get the life safety in place so that the team can then go vertical with the construction. And looking to make that work, we need to issue bonds. And as I was coming over here and noticed we have an aspirational date in there, it says first bond issuance December 18th. I can almost guarantee to you that that is not going to happen. You do not typically issue bonds between Thanksgiving and Christmas. It is a tough time. So reality here is that is most likely going to fall into that probably second week of January. Again, full disclosure, but that still gives us enough time to get the life safety in the ground in order for that construction timing. So all of that said, we then look into that summer of 2028, which is when we anticipate actually having the retail storefronts open and really folks being able to enjoy that first phase of Center Street. Next slide, please. So where are we on the leasing side of things? What you see is the program. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to say that the percentages are based upon the retail, food and beverage and grocery, not the office space, for those of you who are doing the mental math right now. We are, as you can see, we've got the grocer under lease. We've got discussions for the LOI as a letter of intent for about 16,000 square feet of space, and then almost 63,000 square feet of space we are in discussions right now. I asked Amanda, where we are in the process. Is that good? Is that bad? Is it neutral? And I think generally speaking, she said, yeah, this is where we anticipate to be in this phase of the project. But we will be looking very intently on making sure that those numbers continue to go as time moves on. Next slide. I think this is the last one. I hate finishing on risk factors, but we all need to look at this thing with eyes wide open. We are very optimistic about the project, but would be remiss if we didn't say there are some challenges here. Probably no surprise. As I mentioned earlier, I'm actually going to start with the bond issuance and work my way back up. We need to get the bonds issued because that's what enables us to have the capital to put in the first phases of the public infrastructure. So, okay, what do the bond issuers look like? What do those underwriters want to see? They want to know that you have equity investors, that this is a real project. They don't want to go out and issue bonds when you don't have the necessary. They need assurance that this is going to happen. So we need equity in place. Well, what do the equity investors want to see? They want to see that you have got leasing, that you've got a great story to tell, and it's based and it's founded upon a leasing, not only strategy, but actual leases, LOIs, and such, to make sure that what they're investing in is real. So it all comes back to leasing as an extremely important component of making this project go. So then you look at what are the headwinds and the tailwinds from a leasing perspective. Because we're looking to be open in 2028, there are certain flavors of tenants who say that's pretty far out there. Talk to us when we're 2 years out. Well, that's next year. Those are largely your soft goods tenants. Other tenants on the food and beverage side are much more willing to engage with us now. Now it doesn't mean we're ignoring one in favor of the other. We're doing all of these things. It's just to say some are more willing to engage with us now versus others. All that having been said, we have been told that our bond underwriters as well as our equity underwriters are looking for us to achieve 50% pre-leasing as a rule of thumb, which enables them to feel comfortable to move forward with the project. So that is what Amanda and the team is very much gunning for right now to make sure we hit that threshold. All of that is against the backdrop of a crazy financial market situation. I think I saw today, are we at the 100 years for the new administration? I almost look at that as a black swan event. It has been so crazy in the financial markets right now, between the tariffs on again, off again, and then even there was discussion about is Jerome Powell going to keep his job or not? I mention that because these things are not lost on the folks who we are looking to invest with us. The retailers, everybody who is a part of this project is looking at these same, I think that word I've heard more and more in the past 100 days is uncertainty. And markets don't like uncertainty. We don't like uncertainty, but it is the reality of where we are right now. Now, that having been said, what we are hearing from the folks with whom we are having discussions is that this is a great project in a great community. It has so much going for it. And so those are the things that give us a lot of encouragement as we continue to move forward. So it's not to say that it's going to be free of bumps. None of these projects ever are, but we are very optimistic that we're able to move forward. But again, would be remiss if we didn't mention that. I mean, this is reality. So I think that's the last slide. If you go to the next one, it's probably, yeah, that's the last slide. So with that, we will be here to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. I appreciate your candor on the volatility of the situation. So we'll go to questions from council next. Are there any comments or questions from council? And Nancy will let us know if it's allowed. Wow. Oh, I don't see any hands up. So you answered all our questions for now, and we really appreciate the update. Yeah, nobody has any questions. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Our next item this evening is an update and request for direction from council regarding compliance with House Bill 2024-1313, transit-oriented communities. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, community and council. Anna Burton-Zetti, Deputy City County Manager, who's now resident expert PhD in all things HB 1313, is going to walk us through this item. And of course, City County Attorney Rogers is here for any specificity with regards to the legal aspects. Ms. Burton-Zetti.
Thank you. Good evening. Feel like the bar is set. Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. If I could have the next slide, please. So that item this evening, again, is requesting direction regarding House Bill 24-1313. And specifically, we'll be asking for direction regarding whether to seek residential density in close proximity to transit stations. And that's because, for those of you who might not be aware of what this bill is, it created a category of local government called a transit-oriented communities. And this was approved last year, 2024. For these communities that are transit-oriented communities by the bill, it requires that the local government meet what's called a housing opportunity goal, which I'll call the HOG, within close proximity of transit areas. Generally, the HOG is determined to be 40 units per acre for the entire overall area of the HOG. In addition to creating this minimum level of zoning capacity across the HOG, the communities must also establish administrative reviews for those same areas for all parcels of land that are 5 acres or less in size. The administrative review would not apply to subdivisions like platting the property or to rezonings, but it would apply to site development plans, even if the property is zoned planned unit development. Next slide, please. So where are Brimfield's transit areas by definition of this bill? And they're shown on the screen. They're generally the 2 transit areas along US 36, one at Arista and one at Flatiron Marketplace. The majority of these areas, if you're familiar with them, have quite a bit of residential development already occurring near them. And they're largely developed, but there are some vacant parcels as well as opportunities for infill development at both of these sites. Next slide, please. Staff has been monitoring this bill since it was moving through the legislative process in 2024, and we've continued to stay involved, including being a test community for the Housing Opportunity Gold tools that were established by DOLA and attending various DOLA webinars and trainings and technical advisory groups over the last year. The draft preliminary HOG calculations that staff has created based on the information available at this time lead staff to believe that we would have to increase zoning around these station areas to accommodate 11,500 additional units of residential development. It should be noted that increasing zoning capacity does not obligate Brimfield or any property owner to build or approve construction of new residential units. We're just talking about increasing zoning capacity. So any new development would still have to meet development standards that are established by Brimfield, including things like transportation and utility infrastructure. And if a development wasn't able to address transportation or utility infrastructure adequately, it could still be denied by the local government. The bill also addresses the fact that some areas that would have increased zoning capacity may see pressures for redevelopment. And this pressure for redevelopment could displace existing businesses or residents in those areas. Brimfield doesn't have a lot of existing residential areas in these areas that would be likely for displacement just based on their newness and their existing densities. But we would have existing businesses in these areas that could be at risk for displacement. So if Brimfield were to move forward with compliance with 1313, staff's recommendation would be to focus our displacement risk mitigation strategies around business displacement. Next slide, please. I think it's critical to acknowledge that the two areas where Brimfield has transit areas as defined in this bill already, like I said, have high residential densities. However, Due to Broomfield's approach to zoning, we would still not comply with the requirements of 1313 without significantly increasing that zoning capacity. This is because of the way that Broomfield has approached zoning historically. The majority of new and existing areas in Broomfield are zoned planned unit development district. This establishes a custom zone district where the established maximum number of residential units closely aligns with what is actually expected to be built on that parcel. Historically, knowing the anticipated number of units allows for infrastructure modeling and financial plans to be more efficiently completed. The bill requires local governments to change from this approach to land use and instead requires there to be significantly greater zoning capacity, even when there may be no intent to actually build those additional units. And even when there may be additional challenges to building those additional units. Additional challenges could be market demand for those higher density units, compatibility concerns, or as I mentioned, insufficient infrastructure. Next slide, please. It's also important to note that the intent of House Bill 24-1313 to provide transit supportive densities in areas where there are existing transit services is not inconsistent with Broomfield's existing goals and previous actions. For example, recent efforts to establish parking reduction zones and transit-oriented development zone districts were recently taken to provide opportunities for future development to occur through Broomfield's existing development review process. Broomfield has also provided financial support for affordable housing projects near transit service, and we have supported requests for increased density or to allow commercial zoned properties to convert to residential use through our existing development review process. Next slide, please. If Broomfield desires, the community can move towards increasing zoning capacity near transit. As staff considered this potential, we kept 3 main goals in mind as shown on the screen and as detailed in the staff memorandum, as well as 2 additional goals that would need to be kept in mind if compliance with 1313 was desired. Next slide, please. Based on these goals, staff determined that there were 2 primary paths that we can follow. The first being that Broomfield could proceed with individual zoning or PUD amendments. This approach would be very similar to the way that Broomfield currently proceeds with land use decisions, which are largely based on a project by project or parcel by parcel basis. This would allow more focused, nuanced approach that can direct residential density to key parcels while protecting other parcels from the pressures of residential redevelopment. This approach is, however, the most time intensive for staff, the community, and for the city council. It would involve working closely with probably around 20 to 25 property owners and would necessitate at least 35 to 50 city council meetings, which we'd estimate to be about 70 hours of public meetings. Overall, this process would likely take 15 to 18 months. And as I mentioned, would involve hopefully the cooperation with probably around 20 to 25 property owners. The second approach would be to create an overlay zoning district. This overlay district could apply to all properties within a half mile of the stations and could potentially only apply also to just the properties that already have residential uses, depend on how that zoning district was eventually crafted. Staff could draft the district similar to the transit-oriented development zone district and would bring it to a study session to gather input. It would be applied to all properties and thus would be a more streamlined process, probably looking at 2 to 3 city council meeting agenda items, as well as 2 to 3 community meetings. Discussions would still occur with affected property owners, and this effort would take significantly less time at about 6 months. And this would be the recommended path that staff would be recommending. In either case, if compliance with 1313 was sought, we would need to ensure that the increase in zoning densities was able to achieve the additional 11,500 residential units and that the changes incorporated an administrative review for any parcels that are 5 acres in size or less. Next slide, please. So the questions that we have in the direction that we're looking for this evening, it's listed, it should be about 3 questions. Some of them have a few subparts. The first, we're asking if Brimfield is interested in seeking increase in zoning capacity near the US 36 transit stations. If the answer is yes to that question, we'd be asking whether to pursue the individual property rezonings and PUD amendments, or whether to start drafting process for a zoning overlay. And again, the zoning overlay would be staff's recommendation. The second two questions are related to 1313. First, specifically to City Council direct staff to proceed with the initial report to DOLA, which is required by June of this year. Staff does not anticipate that this report will take considerable time. It is finalizing the HOG calculation and submitting that for DOLA's review. The second primary question is whether City Council directs staff to proceed with seeking compliance with House Bill 241313, and specifically whether that would include the densities as required. So again, that's about 11,500 units in our preliminary calculations. And then secondly, whether to include the administrative review process for properties that are 5 acres or less in size. That concludes staff's presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burton-Zetti, and for all of your work on this team. I know it's been a lot to wrap our heads around. So I will go to questions from council first. Any questions or council from my colleagues? How about you, Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf?
Thank you, Mayor. So just looking at questions at this time. So if we were to move in the staff recommended capacity to increase zoning capacity near the US 36 transit station via zoning overlays, would we still have the opportunity, or maybe the property owner would still have the opportunity to go ahead and do the individual property rezoning or zoning process in the years ahead, even with that overlay there?
Thank you for the question. Yes, there would still be an opportunity for property owners to seek their own PUD amendment. For example, if they've sought an even higher density than what would need to be established in the overlay, or to change the development review standards, it would provide a baseline, but the development review process would remain for them.
Okay, all right. That's all the questions I have right now, Mayor.
All right, Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple questions before I provide my comments. The first one is, as it relates to the density requirements of roughly 11,000 units, given Arista's proximity to the Rocky Mount Metropolitan Airport, does their proximity limit the height that buildings can have, and thus kind of reduce the density that that particular area can support? Or is that not quite as much of a concern for either us, the FAA, or any other federal state government agency?
Thank you for the opportunity to add some clarification around that. There are some parcels within close proximity to the airport that are what are considered exempt parcels under 1313. So it allows us to exempt parcels that would not allow any residential zoning based on zoning if they are industrially zoned. And there's a few properties that would fall within the half-mile radius, but they are exempt because they're industrially zoned, primarily because they would fall within the airport, the runway approach. So there are some parcels that would automatically be precluded, and we would continue to exempt those even if we did an overlay. For the properties that remain in Arista, there are some properties that may have a lower height based on recommendations from the airport, but I don't think that we would be approaching that level for those properties, but we'd be working with the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport as a referral agency.
Okay, great. And kind of piggybacking off something you said in there about the overlay. If council were to direct staff to do this, and we go through that process, is there a way to tailor that overlay so that certain neighborhoods see different density increases than others? So like, for example, on the I think slide 3 of the presentation, where you have the circles around both Broomfield and Flatiron stations. Parts of original Broomfield and I believe there is a mobile home park within that radius that have existing densities that are much lower than what Arista has, could you tailor it so that way, like original Broomfield and maybe the mobile home park only see increases of density for up to like quadplexes, for example, while Arista remains with the, big multi-story, multifamily apartments, condos, or even really dense townhomes.
I will have to say, we haven't done a lot of work yet on the overlay and how to really start drafting it. Waiting for direction this evening. But I think there's a lot of creative ways that we could approach it to try and look at that. Keeping in mind that if we lower the density in certain areas, it would mean we'd have to increase the densities in others because we have to still achieve that 11,500. So that would be the trade-off.
Yes. And then my third question goes to, there are some properties that RTD owns that are within the radius of the Broomfield and Flatiron stations, including the stations themselves that RTD owns. Is there a way for us to partner with RTD in order to get them to develop and or redevelop properties they are or are not using? Because at the moment, RTD, I don't believe under this bill is required necessarily to develop those properties. And there's no way necessarily for us to kind of incentivize them, I would say. So I lay that question on the floor.
And that's a good distinction in terms of the bill really doesn't address any type of actual development. It does solely speak just to the zoning entitlement and to the zoning capacity. So it doesn't encourage any property owner to move forward. But in terms of RTD's property, they do have a number of properties in the proximity. Some of them are subject to an intergovernmental agreement that may limit future development. But I'm sure we'd be happy to reach out to them through an overlay process or through the individual zoning process to see if they'd be willing to be a partner in that.
Okay, perfect. Finding the questions, here we go. So in terms of recommendation, I certainly think we should go with the overlay method instead of individual property rezoning. I think it saves a lot of staff time and effort on your part and our part. In terms of compliance with 1313, I did support, or I did urge this council to support 1313. And I personally supported the bill last legislative session, but I wouldn't necessarily say I am like gung-ho and we have to do it the way that the state did it, because I do think there are many administrative burdens placed on staff and us, but I think the intent of the bill should be followed, and we should use that or we should do that under our existing local control for development, land use, zoning, et cetera. Excuse me. And part of the reason I say that is being a little selfish. There are many residents in Ward 2 that do not have easy access to a grocery store, for example. So Ward 2 does not have a single grocery store except for Walmart, but I don't really count Walmart. We don't have a grocery store, really, in the geographic boundaries of Ward 2. We have no access to really like neighborhood coffee shops or anything that most dense communities that Arista, for example, would traditionally have. We have a couple of coffee shops. I don't want to negate those that do exist, but I do hear routinely from residents that they would like to see a neighborhood grocery store, and we don't have the density, as surprising as that may be for some people. We don't have the density in Interlochen, Flatirons, Via Vara, Arista, and so I'd like to see that density increase to facilitate the ability for those businesses to come to that part of Broomfield and actually create the livable, walkable, bikeable community that that area of Broomfield really is poised to best handle in the upcoming years as we progress to making the rest of the city and county of Broomfield far more walkable and bikeable. So I would not necessarily say proceed with doing the initial DOLA report or seeking compliance. I think that 11,500 residential unit around the stations that could actually be spread out into all of Interlochen and include the Flatirons Mall and areas up by Ridge Parkway, which is where the detention center is. And be a little more holistic with that for the surrounding transit stations. And then use some of these principles for the rest of Broomfield, like allowing up to duplexes and triplexes throughout the rest of our single-family zoned neighborhoods for in the future with infill development. I know my time has expired, so
Way
thank
up,
you.
way up. Yeah, you're going into the way future, but thank you. I thought that was very eloquent. Next, we're going to go to Councilmember Lim on the Zoom. Councilmember Lim.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought we were just asking questions, so that's what I was going to do for right now. Has the staff imagined, I know there's a lot of variables here. Has the staff bantered about any possible height that number of stories that buildings might end up being to achieve the density that's required in 1313?
I think, Councilmember Lim, we haven't really dove quite that far into it. But off the top of my head, I think that we would probably start with the transit-oriented development district that was recently created as a place to start from. And looking at Brandon to see if he remembers how high it is. We might have to get that height for you.
Okay, thanks. So there's an exception. Well, there's an allowance in the review process under 1313 that there is no obligation to allow the development to occur if the infrastructure is insufficient. Have you had an incident in your previous review of developments where you told the developer, hey, the infrastructure isn't there? You can't go forward with this. So have you had past experience, and how do you imagine such a conversation happening in an administrative review process? If you found yourself in the case, if the city found itself in the case of the developer is proposing something that you know there isn't the infrastructure for.
I think you've really hit the nail on the head of why Broomfield, I think, has approached zoning the way that we have with our PUD districts and aligning the maximum number of units so closely with what we expect to be built. Our infrastructure is sized adequately to reach that capacity. So no, we don't run into that problem all the time. Occasionally we do, usually on peripheral areas of Broomfield, not in these larger areas, more infilled areas. But how I imagine that would happen is, for example, if an area has been really planned for, let's say 400 residential units, but the zoning capacity is 5 times that, which could be conceivable here. And a developer said, well, my zoning says I could have 1,000 units on this property. We would talk to them about what the infrastructure allows, and it would likely be so challenging for them to upsize the infrastructure to meet the utility requirements that would preclude them from building more than whatever that infrastructure capacity is. So it really becomes a challenge for their engineering and for our system to be able to match and marry that up. I think it's one of the challenges with this is increasing the zoning capacity doesn't necessarily mean all of these units are going to be able to be built, because our infrastructure capacity and our traffic network that we have existing are only going to be able to support so much without significant investment that's not required to be a part of this.
Okay, thank you. Related to that, on page 4, I think it is in the memo, there's a timeline of requirements for 1313, and it was a detail not mentioned in the presentation, but I had a question on it. It said on 12/31/26, there's a water insufficiency notice that could be submitted. And that particularly piqued my interest, of course, because of all of our conversations about our need for water infrastructure maintenance dollars already. So have you had any thoughts as to what Broomfield may or may not submit in that process with a water insufficiency notice?
That's a great opportunity to clarify. Broomfield would not be eligible for that water insufficiency eligibility. Our water systems are planned for our ultimate build out. We have a great system in place for planning ahead. We plan for 125,000 in our ultimate build out scenario, and even that probably it's not an ultimate, but that's our 2050 probably horizon. So with that being said, adding 10,000 units in this particular geographic area does not qualify for us to be able to say that we don't have water secured or infrastructure capacity to serve 10,000 or 11,000 additional units, because we already are planning ahead for that additional number of units. We had just planned for those to occur in a different geographic area. And again, we really don't think that they would necessarily be built here, but we would not be eligible to say that we don't have water to serve this particular area.
Okay, even if, like you said, that it would be a different geographical concentration that perhaps was planned in the original water infrastructure, so that wouldn't.
That's
just
correct.
just the fact that we had the number would be disqualify us from saying we didn't have the infrastructure.
Right. So
Okay.
we would be able to deny an application based on the geographic inability to serve it in that particular area. We could deny a project that was putting us over capacity geographically. But in terms of exempting Broomfield in its entirety from compliance from 1313, we would not be eligible.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Those are my questions.
Oh, and sorry, we were getting the answer to the maximum height was 85 feet in the transit-oriented development district, Councilmember Lim.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's probably around 6-7 stories. I don't think that's pretty typical. Not very many.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on. Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, staff, for putting so much effort into this. And then I know so many people on council, particularly the mayor, was going to bat, for Broomfield and making sure that we had home rule authority. And I will say that heading into this, I still have a lot of questions. I probably will throughout the year. I think for me, it's fiscally and fiscal concerns with the state funding and also local concerns with our funding to provide the infrastructure that's needed within a certain time frame. So I just have some fiscal questions and then just some feasibility questions. I know that in the memo, it talked about how we're gonna, could have existing staff, and there was $400,000 note in there. Without clear funding though and guarantees from the state, what contingency plans exist if our staff capacity is exceeded or if DOLA's grant program is delayed or underfunded?
Thank you. So I should reference the 400,000 I think that we included in the memorandum was an additional cost if during the process we decided to do some additional infrastructure studies that could come up, we thought theoretically for amending PUD districts or working in a particular area. It may come up as questions from the community. And if we needed to do additional studies in an area, then that additional 400,000 was what we thought that might cost to look at. We're not recommending that, again, because it's just zoning capacity and we're not actually looking to build any of these units. In terms of staff capacity, potential impacts could be other projects would have to be delayed. There could be impacts on development review processing time. Those could be potential impacts if we were trying to stretch our existing staff around multiple projects and working with 25 different property owners. That could conceivably happen.
Gotcha. And, you know, talking about other projects, we already have how many units at the ready that we've already approved, and those aren't moving forward necessarily everywhere. What other things that are, I feel like the state is saying like, this is the problem, it's your planning, and our planning is going, it's not, that's not the problem. You know, I think that we have planned for what's best for Broomfield, and I feel like, you know, we're trying to tell our other projects, you know, maybe you aren't dense enough. So what does that do to our other projects? And also, what does this do to, or why are our projects not always moving forward? What other extraneous things that are happening?
I think Kyle Harris with McWinney went through some of those as part of his proposal. The uncertainties in a market, financial, you know, being able to get that financial backing for projects, just uncertainties in the economy, uncertainties in the marketplace in terms of whether they can be sold. We're seeing that with some of our single family homes, which obviously wouldn't be the case here. We're not looking at single family. These are large projects. But it's really those types of issues that we run into. I think, as you mentioned, Broomfield has put in a lot of different efforts recently, including creating zone districts to help expedite the process so you don't have to use a PUD in Broomfield to do high density. We've also reduced our parking requirements and created parking zones that would cover both of these areas that removes the minimum parking requirements, having inclusionary housing ordinances, and as you mentioned, just encouraging high density around our transit areas. So you're right, all those things are happening without being any outside forces coming in.
And so I have two more questions. So what in these areas is holding us back from having more density?
Probably the marketplace being ready. We have projects even as close as within that half mile that are approved and ready to go. They're waiting for existing apartments that have been recently completed to lease up and be ready to move on to their next project before they move, you know, break ground and move on. But that's probably, I mean, that and financing.
All right, one more question. Compliance and risk and those sorts of things. I know DOLA is trying not to be heavy-handed, right? I know that the state perceivably is trying to be heavy-handed, but at the same time, if you're going to hit someone with a stick, find a good stick to hit, because you're not really well funded at the state, I don't think, or we aren't anymore. So non-compliance could resist in losing access to grants, though, and face penalties. It's unclear, though, how the infrastructure limitations will be treated by the state. What happens if Broomfield genuinely cannot meet the HOG due to physical or service limitations? And then what do we know about any appeal or mitigation processes?
So as you mentioned, the compliance factors that they'll be looking at are meeting those deadlines. So the first one is coming up in June, providing them with our preliminary estimate of how many units we believe we'll need to add. The next one will be in December of 2026, laying out how we're going to meet that requirement. And by the end of 2027, we need to have all of the zoning capacity in place to meet that zoning requirement. But we don't have to have built a single unit out of these. It is just addressing the zoning capacity, and we don't have to be working towards addressing infrastructure insufficiencies at all. That's not a part of what's required by the bill. So really it becomes, if you aren't meeting those deadlines, you become ineligible for those grants.
Okay. And one last question, sorry, I do have one more question. I know I've asked this question before, but we didn't really have an answer, and you don't have to have an answer because I don't think that they really know. What kind of funding are we actually looking at if it is shared statewide with grant funding?
I'm not sure how much or what the grants will look like, how much each individual grant could be worth or what it could be used for yet. We'll find out more in the future.
Thank you, that's all.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Nguyen?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. My questions are pretty brief, following Councilmember Henkel's questions on, the fact that what if we don't do anything? And I think my question is, are there really significant consequences if the city and county of Broomfield does not follow with the transit corridor or transit, HB 1313?
The way that the bill is established, the incentive is to be eligible for the grants.
And my follow-up question is, these grants, the money has been allocated, but how much, I guess, is Broomfield, how much money is being looked at, I guess, right now? Like, what's on the table, so to speak?
I would have to look that up. I don't have the exact dollar amounts that were set aside per that bill.
35 million for the entire state.
The mayor has the answer.
So $35 million, and that's for all the city and counties of Colorado. So, and some of this money could be, as we know, budget cut. Obviously, it's allocated for this year, but yeah, no, thanks for asking those questions. My last question is going to be, are we already on track with this? I mean, this community, this council has been very proactive with creating density already. And, my question is, will this really affect us if we do what we're doing already? Or is this going to be another measure that would, in theory, help expand more density in housing?
Very big question for me to try to answer. The intent is to be able to provide additional opportunities for residential development in the transit areas. And this would, if we sought an increase in density around these areas, could potentially provide new opportunities for residential development on parcels that had not allowed residential use before. Whether that would actually translate into actual build units is a completely unknown answer to me.
That's a great answer, because at the end of the day, we can make the zoning laws, we can change things where it's more available, but is there a appetite for developers to come in and develop? Who knows? In our previous conversations, we don't know what the market looks like. So I appreciate your answers, and thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Next is Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a quick couple questions based on the conversation that I don't know if you can answer, maybe Mr. Romine can, but it's interesting because the reason the state is doing this is basically increase housing to reduce housing costs. That's the theory, and some communities aren't allowing enough building so that we can have enough supply and reduce costs. But it was interesting today, it was reported that for the first time, rents have gone down across the metro from 3.5% to 5% due to extra supply that we've finally achieved. So it's your comment about there's housing units approved but not being built because they're waiting to fill existing or housing that's about to come online. So I'm just curious, how many units have we approved that we're pending, that we're already slated to be built? And there's single family and there's multifamily.
So running off the top of my head
Yeah,
from
that's
memory, we have a few different projects, at least 2 under construction in Arista that will be leasing up. The Fairfield at Arista probably has 300 to 400 units that are very close. They are adjacent to the transit stop. Flatiron Marketplace at the other station probably has around 380 units that are approved and awaiting construction because the Bridges apartments were very recently completed by that same developer. So they'll be moving on to that second phase. And there's even a third and fourth phase that can be brought forward on the north side of Flatiron Marketplace there. But that second phase is already approved through site development plan. It could go to permit as soon as the market was ready. Just outside the area, we also have the Flatiron Crossing Mall, hi-fi development. So kind of addressing Councilmember Ward's comment that that area kind of feeds into this. That is also coming in, as well as the construction of the condominiums and townhomes by Century Communities. That's just west of the Omni Hotel. And that's probably 250, 280 total units. I'm going to get all these numbers wrong, but I'm probably in the ballpark. So you're probably
5%.
looking between all of those projects, 1,000 units coming online
That are approved.
that are approved and will be moving forward more than likely. Either they're under construction now or will be within the next few years.
No, there are a couple of hundred affordable housing projects that are within sight, right?
That's a great reminder. How did I forget Harvest Hill?
Mm.
So Harvest Hill is 100% affordable on the east side of US 36, walkable to the transit station, and that is also recently broken ground.
And then there's the baseline, what's been approved, which is lots and lots of extra homes
Yes.
that hopefully, so it is interesting to the point that, you know, the chaos in the market may slow all these down, but we're already meeting what the state wants us to do, basically, without the state pushing us to do that. Thank you very much. That's my question.
Thank you. And if I can ask for further clarification, aren't there several thousand permits not being pulled and moved forward on projects that this council approved? Residential projects over the years that have not moved forward yet. And that has really impacted our projections. It impacted our water projections and our sewer projections. So wasn't that in like the 6,000 range?
We definitely have about 6,000 that we've been talking about in the queue. I think that does include projects that are in the pipeline, so to speak. So not all of those are fully approved, but yes, there's probably a couple thousand that are fully approved, site development plan. They are ready to go. They just need to come in for a construction permit.
And so the delay has nothing to do with zoning.
It does not.
Thank you. Who's next? Oh, Councilmember Anderson.
I don't really have questions. Can I just give my feedback real quick? Is that good?
Absolutely.
Okay. So going to, this is a great discussion. I think we've kind of covered everything here regarding the zoning that we've already been doing, all the really good work. We've already been increasing density, improving units. So I would say on the first question, with the increase in zoning capacity, I just know we don't need to do anything there, but if we do decide to take a path forward, definitely the zoning overlay, so we're not taking more staff time away from it. And on the initial report to DOLA, it sounds like you pretty much have that ready to go and it wouldn't be a heavy lift. So I'm fine if we submit it, but I'm also fine if we skip that step and just focus on the work we've been doing in Broomfield. And whether we should comply with requirements of 1313 to increase to 11,500 units. Personally, I think we should continue to follow our own process and the progress we have made and not divert our focus and staff resources from the current path of designing what works for Broomfield. And we should not remove our public process by allowing for administrative review. And we really just need to maintain our local control and do what is best for Broomfield as a whole community and not take away from what we've been doing by following this process that's supposed to be helping us to get to exactly what we have been doing. So that is my direction. I think I covered all of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't really have any questions. Thank you, staff, for the detailed explanation and everything that you've done on this. On the questions, on number one, yeah, I do think we should increase the zoning capacity. I do think that the zoning overlay is the best path forward. Regarding compliance with 1313, I'm okay with going forward with the report. I'm okay with 2A of increasing the zoning capacity, but I'm not okay with 2B. I understand that that's part of 1313. And to be fully compliant with it, we'd have to do it, but I am not in support of doing an administrative review for those projects. So that is my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem Shab.
Thank you, Mayor. So Broomfield, I believe, has and continues to take actions in efforts to increase housing near transit stations and existing future transit corridors. I believe that we share some of the same goals as the state with House Bill 24-1313. However, I do believe that this bill remains an unfunded mandate and an overstep by the state government. But with that said, I would support that staff seek increases in zoning capacity near the US 36 transit stations via zoning overlays. I would support to direct staff to proceed with the initial report to DOLA regarding the HOG by the June 2025 deadline. It doesn't seem like this is too onerous for staff to complete, and it provides information to the region and our partners. So I think it is a good tool that we can use. I think focusing the displacement strategies on commercial and retail properties, that sounds like a good strategy to use at this time. And then I would not support directing staff to proceed with seeking to comply with the requirements of House Bill 1313, including increasing zoning capacity to 11,500 residential units near the transit stations, and especially establishing the administrative review. So that's the feedback I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Any other first round feedback from my colleagues? Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. For completeness, I suppose I'll jump in. So for item 1, yes, I'm in favor of this. I'm in favor of the zoning overlay as recommended. Compliance, for the first one, yes, I am in favor of this. Second, 2A, I am in favor of 2A as well, and I'm in favor of 2B. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So who else hasn't weighed in? Councilmember Ward, back to you.
I know I went for my first round, and I think we've gone through everyone so far.
You went into the future.
I did. I did not specify whether I would go forward with administrative review or not. I would be in favor of doing administrative review. We have heard that that saves at least 6 months on development timelines, and time is money for these developers. So if we really are serious about lowering housing costs, I think being able to reduce their timeline is appropriate. And I just have to say, I am a little disappointed with this council wanting to pat themselves on the back with all the good work they've done, which we have done a lot of good work. But that doesn't mean we've done it perfectly. That doesn't mean we are where we should be. And that doesn't mean we can't do better. And so I'm a little disappointed with this woe is me, Big Brother states coming in. Ignore that. Just, are there principles that this piece of legislation have that we can support about wanting to increase density and increase people's ability to have mode choice options with public transit, which does necessitate increased density, being able to walk and bike, which requires increased density, and having more businesses that can be supported by those increased residential units. I look at it from that perspective, not from, oh, what's this piece of legislation and Big Brother state governments coming down to impose something on us. So I just want to state that publicly. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Ward. Everybody has gone around once already, right? So I'm just going to state how I feel. And I believe that a lot of us got involved in local government over land use issues. We wanted to have a voice and ensure that the public had a voice and how our future community looks. I am one of those people. Coming from Ward 5, I saw this massive piece of undeveloped land that's still undeveloped. And I said, I want to make sure that doesn't turn into Commerce City, full of oil and gas wells. So I ran for office to help shape what my community looks like and have a voice. And I agree with so many of these goals, Councilmember Ward, I really do, but there's a deal breaker in there for me, and that is the administrative review process. I believe zoning plays a role in safety, as we've learned with oil and gas operations and their ability to just set up shop 500 feet away from our homes and schools and parks. up until we pushed back on the state because their laws we had to follow were not protective of health, safety, and welfare and the quality of life for the people who lived nearby. Many of us were impacted. And it caused real harm to have heavy industry next to homes. It's not a compatible use. Zoning is a safety issue to protect from those incompatible uses. And when we give away our ability and take away the public process to have a voice, then we might as well just all close up and go home and let the state run everything. Local control is important because no one knows our communities better than we do. We live here. They don't. They didn't have to live next to the oil and gas wells. They didn't have to take the calls of the crying parents because their children couldn't sleep because their homes were rattling. They didn't have to constantly do compliance checks to make sure that, fires weren't starting in our public open space. So I come from this from a completely different angle, that these decisions need to be local and they need to have a public process. And I have been talking to folks at DOLA. They've reached out. They're probably listening tonight because they're getting a lot of pushback from other communities too. And where we are now is, what can we live with? I can live with most of this, but when it comes to the administrative review and taking away the public's voice, that's where I have to die on that hill, and I will. I cannot support taking away the public's voice in these decisions because we have seen how land use decisions impact everyone around them. And having been through that myself, I can't say that I trust. I'm cynical. So that's where I land on it. I know we're kind of all over the place, so I'll go ahead and listen to what my colleagues have to say. Starting with you, Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be very brief. For the questions for council, I am a yes for zoning overlays. Additionally, for regarding the compliance, I think that even though this is a small pot, I think that Broomfield should be compliant because end of the day, we are a community that wants to see transit and we want to see growth. And I think we're already doing the stuff that the state thinks that we need. So I do agree that with the mayor that this is a bit infraction on, the community, local governance, but I see where their state is going and I think I agree with the priorities. It's just, maybe this might not be the best way of addressing it, but in the grand scheme of things, I think that we should be compliant. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. On the first question of zoning overlay, I think we're probably all in agreement. That's the best path to go forward. On compliance, I certainly appreciate the mayor's passion on the wrongs of preemption from the state. I don't disagree with anything that she said. And the first version of this law, the year before, was much, much, much worse and would have required us to basically put in duplexes and quadplexes in single-family neighborhoods and oversteps from the state. This supposedly is not as bad, but they still has some poison pills. Home rural communities should have been exempted. The state should respect that, but I don't believe we should not comply with the law. Just on principle, I don't believe that's the best path forward optically and legally. It reminds me a little bit of a couple years ago, the state passed a red flag law, and a number of sheriffs said, well, we're not going to enforce that because we don't agree with the law. And that included our neighbor in Weld, included the sheriff in El Paso, which later had the Club Q shooting, where a red flag might have helped. So I think, that's the process. We elect people to the legislature, they vote on our behalf, they pass laws. They should be required to uphold this, why they made this decision. So I believe we should comply because it's the law. And if there's a pathway for legal action to join with some other communities and file suit and force the state to back off, that would be the best path to go forward because that's the best process. So
I think you did. Thank you, Councilmember. And Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. On zoning capacity, zoning overlays is fine. Yes, proceed with the HOG on June 2025. The issue, a couple things that I'll echo of other council members is that We know our area the best. I mean, we have soil conditions too that are different than other areas. We have water infrastructure issues that are different than other areas. And it seems like we're trying to hammer a big answer that may not answer the areas that we want to. Yes, is the idea the pie in the sky that we want to create more density? That's great in the zoning capacity. Do we need to do it in a timeline that is required necessarily by a lot of people who actually never served in local government? Representative Byrd said she was, very against this bill. And I think a big part of it is that she served in local government. And I think a lot of people are making decisions and they've never served in local government and heard those voices from behind your fence telling you, hey, this is going to impact me. So I am a no on 2A and a no on 2B.
All right, thank you, Councilmember. And Councilmember Lim?
Thank you. Regarding zoning capacity, yes on zoning overlays. Regarding compliance, number 1, yes, that's fine to submit the HOG. Number 2, A and B are both no's for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any other council members who have not weighed in? Councilmember Leslie's not here. Who haven't we heard from? Did I miss anyone? Got Clem, Austin, Kenny. Oh, that's it, right? Okay. Would you like to summarize your direction?
I would like to give it a try, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Burton-Zetti.
So I think we did hear clearly that the direction is to bring back an overlay zoning district that would increase zoning capacity near transit areas along US 36. So we will prepare that through a study session and put that on the agenda. It may not be until early 2026, just so that if anyone's in the community is interested, that would be our likely timeline for that. In terms of submitting the HOG report that's due in June, we did hear generally consensus to go ahead and submit that report. And then it starts to get a little more muddy. In terms of whether to comply with the 1313 densities, I think generally there was more direction to move towards compliance with the densities, the density goal in 1313. But I did not get clear direction on the administrative process. That seemed relatively split between not seeking it at all, or those who were not interested in any compliance with 1313 and those who wanted to have administrative review. So if we could get a little more clarity on the 1313 densities.
I've got 5-4 against.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. On density.
On the, no, I didn't. On the administrative review.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I must have missed one. Thank
That's
you.
okay. LA, JM, DS, HH, JL.
Okay, thank you. All right. But the administrative densities was a yes.
That
I
was
believe.
still kind of split, but not as positive no.
All right. We will do our best. There will be another study session so we can get additional input and we could change direction at that time. But we will move towards the density for 1313 as we prepare for that study session.
Okay, sounds wonderful. Well, thank you all for the conversation. Our next item this evening is a discussion regarding possible updates to the Broomfield Municipal Code to add new regulations related to natural medicine. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Council. And making his way down is Planning Manager Brandon Rowe. Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, City Manager Hoffman. Good evening, City Council, Mayor Pro Tem. Again, Brandon Rowe, Planning Manager. Could I get the next slide, please? So the study session before you this evening is regarding, could we go back one, please? Is regarding natural medicine. I'm going to start it with what is natural medicine, and I'm going to ask for grace as I sound out the words. But Proposition 122 define natural medicine as a certain psychedelic plants and fungi that affect a person's mental health and are controlled substances. So that includes DMT, ibogaine, mescaline, psilocybin, and psilocin. I think I got like 80% of that correct, but I appreciate that. But those are the typical types of controlled substances that are natural medicines based on Proposition 122. Next slide, please. So what is Proposition 122 and what did it do? So in November of 22, Prop 122, or the Decriminalization, Regulation, Distribution, and Therapy Program for certain hallucinogenic plants and fungi initiatives, was approved by the Colorado voters. So 2023, Senate Bill 23290 approved and replaced what Prop 122 did to establish a regulatory framework. So Prop 122 had a lot of great ideas, but didn't really have the how do we do this element in it. Senate Bill 23290 did. And then in 2024, Senate Bill 24-198 was a cleanup of that regulatory framework to make it a little more refined, and that's where we are today. So Prop 122 and the Senate bills decriminalize and allow for hallucinogenic products, natural medicines, and prohibit any local jurisdiction from not allowing their use in medical facilities within their jurisdictional boundaries. So unlike when marijuana was approved by the state, which allowed communities to opt out of allowing for the sale or the production, manufacturing, Prop 122 and the Senate bills prohibit that prohibition for local governments. Next slide, please. So what does that mean? It means that while local jurisdictions can't prohibit natural medicines, healing centers, or the production and manufacturing of these products, it does mean that we can control the time, place, and manner of where it occurs. The next few slides are going to be broken up in that time, place, manner nature. So for time, staff is proposing to not include any specific operating time limitations on natural medicine facilities. We typically don't place limitations on operational hours for businesses in Broomfield. The one notable exception was regarding retail marijuana, but the state law does not allow for the retail sale of natural medicines. It has to be controlled through a licensed healing center. So it just can't be a random citizen going up to the manufacturing or production site and purchasing the psychedelic mushrooms. Next slide, please. Place. So staff is proposing to limit commercial cultivation, manufacturing, and testing of natural medicines to properties zoned for industrial uses. And in addition, allowing commercial cultivation on properties zoned for agricultural uses. Healing centers, which operate similar to medical offices, would be allowed in properties zoned for industrial commercial uses. And then staff is proposing to maintain the state's requirement for all natural medicine businesses to be located at least 1,000 feet away from a child care center, preschool, elementary, middle, junior, or high school, and or a residential child care facility. A modification option is measuring the property line to measuring from property line to property line, as opposed to what the bill is, which is property line to the closest part of the building with that natural medicine facility. The modification for us that we're proposing is to make it property line to property line. It's a lot easier administratively to do those measurements. It's a lot more exact as opposed to trying to guesstimate where tenant spaces may end in a building. Next slide, please. And then manner. So the proposed code would ensure that cultivation areas are enclosed and secured, aligned with Colorado revised statutes. Typical industrial use limitations on odor, smoke, heat, glare, light would apply. And then we were proposing to allow for the co-location of cultivation facilities and healing centers, which is consistent with the state law allowances. This allows for a more efficient use of tenant spaces and could alleviate scattering of the uses throughout the community. Next slide, please. So sort of breeze through those, but they were pretty straightforward for the time, place, manner. But the next steps, if council directs staff to move forward, is that we would create a Brimfield Voice page related to the proposed regulations. We would make that really clear to the residents that we are not given the opportunity to say yes or no to allowing these in the community. It's just how we regulate where they go and how they go. That way, as the public is educated on this issue, they're able to provide feedback and thoughts on the proposed time, place, and manner regulations. And then we would draft an ordinance to codify the regulations and bring those back to you later this year. Next slide, please. So I do have two questions for you. Not as many subparts as Ms. Burton-Zetti had, but mine are, does council desire for staff to work forward to codify the time, place, and manner regulations proposed for natural medicine uses? And then the second one is, does council support deferring to the state for licensing of medical or natural medicine uses and opting out of creating a local licensing structure? So this one I wanted to spend a little time on before we wrap up. So Prop 122 and the Senate bills allow a community to opt in to creating a local licensing structure in addition to the state's existing structure that they've enacted. In the memo, staff noted that that is not the recommendation for Broomfield at this time. We don't anticipate this being a very popular use or a high volume use coming into the community. And when looking at the amount of staff time that the local licensing structure for marijuana required, we expect the same sort of elements applying here, where there would be reviewing applications, inspections, follow-up, compliance insurances, those sorts of things. And for something that we don't anticipate generating a lot of interest in the community, it seems that at this time, the best approach is to defer that to the state licensing and allow the state to fund and manage those licenses. That concludes staff's presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to council questions or comments next. It's kind of loose. It's on my script with the study session. So if you can do questions and comments at the same time, if you like. Councilmember Lim.
Yes, question first. Does the state regulate the disposal of the natural medicine waste? That on the CML flyer that was linked from the memo, it said that there were local governments who were requiring, special handling, so the refuge just doesn't get thrown in an exterior refuge container that anybody could get in or anything. And if we don't do any local licensing, then are there any restrictions on disposal of the natural medicine waste?
Thank you, council members. So for the first question, I am not sure on the limitations or requirements from the state level, but we can definitely get that answer for you prior to the ordinance moving forward. One thing that we do require is safe disposal of marijuana. So we could look at that and model the code after that, which would create a local requirement that would be in the zoning code that wouldn't necessarily require a license, but they would still have to comply with all of the regulations for time, place, and manner. And that would fall under the manner element.
Okay, that's great. That would be my position, that we need something in the code that regulated proper disposal of the waste. I looked at the ordinance that was passed by the state. I didn't see anything in my quick glance that said anything about disposal. So I think it is left up to the local government. And so I definitely want us to do something with that so it doesn't get thrown in the garbage and people are hunting through the garbage looking for natural medicine waste. My other question, manner restrictions. When it says in the manner of restrictions that are proposed, that you shouldn't be able to smell it from a public area. I assume that includes the sidewalk?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, so it would be beyond the property line. So if the sidewalk is located on the property, that's where we would get have to be a little specific on the specific sites. But generally, the thought is if it's off-site, you shouldn't be able to smell any substances.
Okay, so you're saying the way it is right now, if you could smell it from the sidewalk and not have it violate what you're writing as manner restrictions?
There is the potential for that, but it would be a case-by-case basis on the properties.
Okay. Okay, so question number one, yes, I addressed that, and yes, I want something in the code with disposal of the waste. And yes, it's okay to defer to the state for the licensing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll then go to our other online participant, James Marsh-Holshan.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have any questions actually, and I am yes on both the questions. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. That was quick. Next, we'll go to our folks here, starting with Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor. One quick question. Is there a demand for these substances?
Councilmember, I can't speak to the substances demand, but I can say from the use perspective, since this was approved in 2024 and the regulatory framework really got established, Broomfield has received one inquiry. Staff is just being proactive to establish that code.
And then with that said, there isn't a high demand for this from what I've seen as well, but I do agree that we should have something in line code, because if the state did legalize or decriminalize, whatever you want to call it, the state did something that we should, as a community, make our own guidelines or make some local, regulations. So the answer is yes for both. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Potem Shah.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll keep this quick. Yes for the first one, no for the second one.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
I just had a very quick question. It's interesting why there's such restrictions on something that is not a retail and actually is quite expensive. I think if you were to go into these, you'd spend $1,500 for an hour-long trip for your treatment. So it's not something kids are going to walk in and fork over $2,000 for an experience. And I don't know I'm interested to hear research on what Councilmember Lim was asking in terms of whether they throw the materials out in the trash after they've been used. But so I'm just curious what the rationale for making it harder to locate a natural medicine therapy place by adding these restrictions. Not that I think any of our schools are necessarily within 1,000 feet of a retail center.
Councilmember, thank you. So we just maintain the same separation distance that the state had established in their regulatory framework. The only change was property line to property line for ease of administration.
So thank you, along with the same, sorry, need my glasses. As Councilmember Marshall said, yes, and support deferring to the state.
Mayor, Brandon, we found the regulations on waste. So in Rule 3120 in the Colorado Code of Regulations, which is the regulatory scheme for psilocybin, which Councilmember Limit wouldn't be in the statute. These are the Secretary of State approved regulations. There's a whole section on how the waste disposal needs to occur, including locked, secured storage and secured disposition receptacles. You have to have locked waste receptacles. There looks like there's a CDPHE regulation that ties into these waste regulations. So it looks like the state has addressed. I mean, it's a little more than a page long about how to deal with waste of these products.
Back to me, I'm sorry. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have one question about the state licensing authority versus if we were to create our own. If we were to create our own, would we model it somewhat, at least in part, after what we did with marijuana? Or are we going to have to do dramatic, are there going to be dramatic differences between the two for a variety of reasons?
Councilmember Ward, we did not get that deep into sort of looking at what the licensing structure was. I think generally the clerk's office would agree that there were some lessons learned from the marijuana licensing that we would all take into consideration if council's consensus was to go that direction. But we didn't get that far at this point.
Okay. And then in the present, or in the memo, it was noted that there were certain communities, like the city of Boulder, for example, had decided to go with a smaller setback than what the state law permits. Do you know why certain communities have decided to do that, other than, like, I know Granby decided to not have a setback, and that might just be because of their sheer size. They don't have the ability to have a setback. But I mean, Boulder is a relatively it's a larger community. Do you know why why a community would choose that?
Councilmember, we don't know specifically why individual communities made those decisions to deviate from the state. It was one of the things that local jurisdictions had the power for. But we could find out, we could reach out to them prior to the code coming forward if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, I just a little interested into why some communities made certain decisions. Other than that, yes, I do at this time support number one, time, place, and manner regulations. And then number two, I think at this time I would be fine deferring to the state, but open for changing my mind on that one, I suppose.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for diving into this, and thanks for trying to attempt to, pronounce all these different names. I do know of a police officer actually that went on scene at the King Soopers shooting and eventually had to use psilocybin treatment. And so we received an email, just totally against all mushrooms and those sorts of things. And I think people don't understand what it actually does. So I just encourage the public to just understand what it does. And after his treatment, he had it in Florida. It was actually the union for the police that actually paid for it, for this treatment for PTSD. And it was really helpful. He said it essentially saved his life. And I think that that's really important to talk about when we talk about this issue. I do have one random question, and I was trying to, dive into this a little bit more. I don't know much about it other than how it's affected those people that I know. I will say I am okay with, obviously codifying the time, place, and manner. I don't understand if the state regulations, though, if they mandated people to stay on site with a license provider. I'm assuming that that's the case because that would be most important to me.
Councilmember, thank you. So the state statute does reference administration and delivery of the natural medicines in a controlled setting. So I don't have the specific language, but I think it's a fair assumption based on that it would have to be all contained within the location or the venue that's delivering it.
I would like to see, I might add a little bit to this. This is what my daughter does. I give her option A and B, and she's like, I'll do Z. So A is yes, and the second one is yes too for deferring to the state licensing. I would also like to just add, if we could add some sort of just education on psilocybin. Not a lot of people don't understand some of these natural medicines. And so maybe in our next memo, if we can just provide some sort of additional medication. I was very thankful to read what CML had written and what other, entities have put in there, but something that's pretty easy for people to understand. It would be helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes to both of these. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Schaaf, you wanted to clarify something.
Oh, yes, thank you, Mayor. In an effort to keep it short, I answered no on the second one. I answered no in my notes, but that is not to implement a local licensing for use, instead deferring to the state. So yes on both. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much for the clarification. Councilmember Anderson.
Okay, thanks. I do have a couple questions. And just when we're looking at the commercial and industrial, that does not include mixed use commercial, correct?
So it would allow it if the zoning allows for commercial or industrial uses. So if a mixed use property allowed manufacturing or something of that sort, it could. Yes,
But there would still be the setback from residential if there were residential uses.
That's
not
correct.
Mixed use, okay.
Yep.
And is there, this one you might not have the answer to, it might be for the future and it might already be covered in the state, but I did a quick search on psilocybin and how it impacts driving. And so even after you leave the facility, you can still be impaired, and it highly encourages that you don't drive for several hours after. So is the state addressing impaired driving in the regulations? I did not look.
Councilmember, I don't know the answer to that question, but we can add it to the list to look at possibly.
Okay, because that would be the concern as people are leaving, if it's a busy area and you have, I guess anywhere they're going, if they're impaired, that would not be, that would not be good. So that'd be great to hear the answer to that one. And so I think that is the, so, okay, the answers to the two questions, that was all I had. I thought I had a third question. Okay, so I would say, yes to codifying the time, place, and manner. I was looking at the same thing that Councilmember Lim, after she noted that, I see where it says that it refers to the local code there. So that sounds like it's not an issue, but if the disposal, I think we should just check that one more time to make sure that we don't need something in our local code regarding the disposal. And then and include it in our local regulations if we do need to address it. And then, yes, to deferring to the state for licensing. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else need to weigh in? I think we got everybody's feedback, and I think they're both great too, if you need my input. So thank you very much, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you.
All right. We have one more item, but do y'all want to go ahead and take our 10-minute break now and then come back and do our 2E? Sound good? Okay, it's 7:47. We'll be back at 8 o'clock. Thanks. Welcome back. We're continuing with our study session on item 2E, Metro District Standard Language and Approach. It's our final item this evening, and a request for council's direction for developing a model service plan with standard requirements for future metropolitan districts in Broomfield. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. Jeff Romine is going to walk us through this item. Maddie Guzman, who's our new CMO analyst, we're very excited to have her, is here learning and participating, developing the data and information for, we say, Prof Romine, and Carl Front as well. We've been talking about metro districts for as long as I can possibly remember. Council gave direction a while ago. This is the culmination of several of those conversations over the last 5 years, knowing that Broomfield fundamentally has been built on metro districts. So walking that back is almost impossible because it's fundamental to who we are and what we do. But certainly providing those parameters and boundaries around how to do it, when, under what circumstances, and how do we hold them accountable is the conversation for tonight. Mr. Romine.
Thank you, Manager Hoffman, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. That was my presentation, so thank you very much. Yeah, no kidding. So if you don't mind, Mayor, I'm just going to cover a little bit of detail in this just to make sure that everybody does understand what's going on with metro districts and the role it's been playing. I will also mention, and I'm going to say this several times because I think it's really important, whatever council decides to do with a model service plan will not impact the existing 49 districts. This is only about either amending a district or new districts that are coming forward. And I would just say that we do get requests for new districts, that we've got a couple that we're working on right now, and we do see some additional ones likely coming forward in the future. So with that, next slide, please. Metro District, as all council members know, this is a tool that has been used to help fund the public infrastructure. In some cases, the Metro District will retain control and ownership of those improvements. In other cases, they will pass them on to the city and county. They will have to meet, of course, our design guidelines and our construction guidelines if it's something that's going to be passed to us for ownership, but it is the two methods in which you get the infrastructure put in place. It will vary within the communities for these metro districts. So in some cases, they're at a more enhanced level of infrastructure. So oftentimes a greater level of trees, sidewalks, and other streetscaping and other things. But it also does include the core infrastructure that you oftentimes think about, which is your water, sewer lines, as well as streets, the localized streets. Metro districts are just one type of special districts. Previously, last month, we discussed some other of those types of forms, such as business improvement districts and general improvement districts. Those are other types of special districts, and they do all have limited taxing authority that is granted. We do have, as mentioned, we have 49. The last one was created in the last decade, but before that, we really saw most of the growth of special districts occur in 2000, in the 2000 decade and the 2010 decade. As a note, I know you can all look these things up, but I just wanted to kind of give you some sense of the scale of what these things do from the standpoint of the taxing authority that they have. So within Broomfield, the metro districts range between 8.13 mils to 84.254 mils. That's on top of the school district, the fire district, and of course the city and county. As a reference, it's one of those numbers that after a while you just learn, and I just know by heart, is the city and county's mill levy is 28.968. So it gives you some sense of where that sits. Most of them and most of the school districts range between 44 and 62 mills, depending on which school district. And again, we have 6 school districts that are operating in some portion of Broomfield. Next slide, please. In all cases, City Council approves the creation of a metro district. So it's something that's petitioned to you, and then you have the authority to approve them to become in existence. You do that through the approval of the service plan and a financing plan. So those things come together, and there's certain things that we do within it. At the same time, regularly, there's an administrative review that's undertaken related to metro districts. Specifically, if they want to issue new debt, even within the guidelines that city council sets. So say as an example, you said maximum of 50 mils. If they want to, if they've only issued debt up to a certain level or up to a certain amount, if they want to then go issue additional debt within their capacity that's been approved, that request comes to the city manager and the city attorney. At which point they review it, and if they have to make a decision whether there's an objection to it, and it can move forward. If there's not, we have a certain period of time. So we're actually, strangely, council doesn't hear about this, but we probably are talking about metro districts about once a month within the staff. Carl and I spend a fair amount of time reviewing these things, and then Nancy and Jennifer make the decisions on what we're going to do, and a formal letter is then submitted. So that's there. At the same time, they also submit their annual reports, both to the city clerk that comes to us, and then they also submit it into Colorado DOLA, who is actually the regulatory authority for metro districts within Colorado. And there are roughly 1,300 special districts in Colorado. Obviously, a lion's share of those are metro districts. In our case, of course, we have some special districts, i.e. schools are considered special districts, as is the fire district and some others. But so most of our districts are actually metro districts also. Next slide, please. We have not, at this point, unlike some other communities, we do not have an adopted model service plan. This has been a method that's been utilized in this community. So the attorneys and the district itself provides that information, and it'll be in slightly different forms, and then we review it. So therefore, there's limited consistency between all the metro districts, all the same core elements, but how it's laid out and how it's discussed. And some of the assertions that are made within those service plans are different depending upon exactly how they're formed up. And that was just something that happened and has evolved. So the 49 districts, there's not a unified approach to them, but there is a general approach to them. And so that does exist. It is something that we have talked about within the community or within staff, and it's something that occasionally city councils asked us questions about, which is why we're bringing it forward today as a discussion topic. We receive roughly 2 to 3 this over the last 2 years, and sometimes more, as many as 4 or 5 in a given year over the last 2 or 3 years. However, as the economy changes, oftentimes you have what's as we referred to it, and as I noted before, a refunding opportunity where a metro district will want to change their debt obligations and move them around and adjust for interest or term or things like that. And so we'll see those refunding opportunities, that refinancing that will occur, and that's part of those requests. Normally, for bonds, as you all know, both for the municipal bonds as well as for metro districts, they tend to run 20 to 30 years in duration. However, there are cases where those bonds will go beyond those 30-year periods and beyond, and that's within the capacity. As they've been approved within their service plan, we can put certain guidelines in it, but generally speaking, that is not one of the guidelines we put in place as of in Broomfield at this point. The other part of the debt sequencing that occurs is oftentimes what's referred to, and you've heard us talk about it, as developer advances. And developer advances, so a metro district or development will go forward, they'll go out and issue debt, and they'll pay for the improvements. And sometimes, rather than go issue additional debt, a developer will advance to the project some additional infrastructure and pay for those. And then oftentimes there's an agreement that is made between the metro district and the developer where they will write the terms. Those are what I refer to as they're subordinated and they're not guaranteed. So they don't have that same financial stability. So sometimes what we see with the metro districts is the decision by the metro district to switch that from a non-secured debt into a secured debt by issuing additional bonds. And so that may be a B or C bond. It'll be still subordinated, but it will now all of a sudden have a security to it because it's now an issued debt. And so we do see those come through sometimes, and several of them have occurred within Broomfield in the recent years. And you oftentimes will hear about that from a developer when they're talking about some of these things. So I wanted you to understand that there's both the secure debt, which is the bonded debt or the loan debt, and then there is this developer advanced debt at the same time. Next slide, please. Very briefly, this just gives you a sense of what the current guidelines are. They do have regular elections every 2 years. And oftentimes, though, when you look at these metro districts, you will see that the election has been voided year after year, or 2 years after 2 years. More or less, nobody decided to run for those open seats. This is a governmental entity, so therefore there's a general election that is required. If nobody runs, then the existing board stays in place. And there are many metro districts in Broomfield where, in fact, the election has not been held for 10, 15 years. And it's a difficult thing, just as, you know, you have to make a decision to run for a public board, but that's what happens. And so that canceling of an election does occur. There's public notification for the election, but that does exist. And so you oftentimes don't see the board change. Boards are generally created, as we just did with the bid most recently for the Broomfield Town Square, by the entity that is putting it together, the owners of the property. And so as it goes forward, oftentimes you want to see resident involvement or business involvement, perhaps. But if nobody runs, then it stays to be exactly the people that are on it. And you've heard that from various developers over the years. There are disclosure requirements for the property owners. There's oftentimes, the way that we have done it here is maximum debt limits, maximum allowable mill levies. Now, I'm just going to mention real briefly, those mill levies are set when you approve the service plan. Oftentimes they are 30 or 40 or 50 mills. When you look at some of these mills, though, you'll note that they've risen above that. And that's because of the way that the mills can work in Colorado. And that is you have what I refer to as fixed or variable mills. And it's because of how they're put forward. So when you have a debt that's been a voter approved, it may be for financing that debt. And so therefore the mills are matching to what the debt payments are. That's what creates the variable rates. Otherwise, like in our case, where we don't do it that way, we have set mills and they're 28.968 as an example. The other thing that oftentimes within the metro districts and within our service plans is a maximum interest rate. And it's either floating or it's tied rate. And when I say floating, it's often tied to what's called LIBOR or perhaps US Treasury 10-year notes or something like that. So those can all happen. Moving forward. Next slide, please. So staff has undertaken a preliminary analysis of both the metro districts to just get a better sense of them, and at the same time reached over to several local communities within the area to understand what they're doing as far as regulating and monitoring these types of entities at this point. It has not been an extensive list, more or less. We haven't done everything and turned over but we have done a pretty thorough analysis. So we've looked at Colorado Springs, Fort Collins as an example, Commerce City, Thornton, and other communities around the metro area as part of our analysis. The next step is to consider whether some of the potential items that we've identified and the parameters related to it should be put into what we would call a model service plan and to bring those forward. If so, if council would like us to do that, our plan is to bring it forward in fall of 2025. So we don't have a specific date yet. We're looking at the council calendar to make sure that there's adequate time, but that's our general goal. Next slide, please. So both in the memo as well as within the presentation that was shared with council on Friday, but within the memo that we provided before, we did give you a laundry list of things that we, the staff, have looked at and thought about considering into something that would be called a model service plan. So these are items that we've heard from council at different times. We've heard also in the general community, which is board composition. So what portion, where do they come from? What types of resident involvement? How does that transition occur? And those types of things are things that you could put into a model service plan. Additionally, a minimum vote for debt issuance, so it can be a simple majority as they currently are, or it requires supermajority. We can do those types of things within that. Public outreach requirements is another item that oftentimes is talking about it. And while there is public outreach, because these are public entities, oftentimes those things are missed. And so how do you go through that outreach? And this is something that council very much understands when you think about the 1,000-foot buffer for some of the things you're talking about with land use and other activities, also how we publicize meetings. The meetings are not required to be within the district. They could be at an office down in Denver as an example, or somewhere else. So is it something where you want the residents' involvement? Obviously, then maybe perhaps you'd like those meetings in a more localized area. Sometimes, though, there's no development in that metro district yet, so it would be difficult to necessarily hold it, except perhaps under a tree. But if you wanted to do it in some nearby public office building, it could be done. And then additional disclosure and other things such as noncompliance triggers, and those types of things. Next slide, please. Obviously, as you know, as your economist, I tend to think about things from a financial perspective. And so this gives you the laundry list of the things we've thought about from that perspective also. So the administrative side and now the actual financial side. And you can see that list. I'm not going to go through each item, but one of the things that has come up is the length of time for deferred payments. So that could either be interest deferred or interest in principal being deferred. In some cases, some communities have done 5 years or 10 years. We've seen examples that have been presented to us that are beyond that period of time, which obviously can accumulate that existing debt and therefore extend the amount of time for repayment and the level of repayment. So it could be more. You think about it from the standpoint of a 30-year mortgage as an example for a home. Oftentimes when you're buying your home, or someone is buying a home in a normal interest environment, you'd be paying roughly, by the time you make all of your interest payments and principal payments, it's about 3x the price. In some cases, these metro districts may have 4 or 5x what that debt level is. So instead of paying for a $500,000 house, it's going to cost you $1.5 million over 30 years. In this particular case, it may take a longer period of time, where the 30 years may result in a $2.5 million total payments. Obviously, that's a burden for those that are living within the metro district. And so you can see those types of things. The interest rates limited to interest rates limited to market rates when it is an affiliated relationship or when it is perhaps a developer advance that's being refinanced. Thinking about how that subordination occurs. Those are types of things. Consideration of an independent financial and market analysis. So often in these, as well as other bond things that we look at, we see what the development pattern is going to look like. As you heard Kyle talk about earlier today, sometimes the market doesn't respond in the way that we're planned. Taking that into consideration helps underwrite and determine the true values of these. And also creates an opportunity for these debts to be retired in 30 years or something else. When it's being refinanced and refinanced and refinanced, sometimes these debts will go on for 50 years or more. And that's some of the concerns that have been expressed by council members and others. And again, you can see some of the other things as far as the debt ratios and that. And then just requiring more of a development status update. So we do get a financial update and a administrative update, but not necessarily where is the development at any given time. So those are the types of things we're talking about and thinking about incorporating into some sort of model service plan. I would say again to you, we think there's probably 5 or 6 items out of this that would make some sense. We think there's some additional research we want to do, as well as talk to the council for metro districts to understand which ones are easier or less of a burden. The one thing we don't want to do is cause metro districts not to occur within Broomfield, because it is an important method in which we can get infrastructure paid for and financed appropriately. Next slide and the last slide. Mayor, these are the things that we're proposing for next steps. We're not quite as detailed as Anna, nor even as simple as perhaps Brandon, but this gives you a sense. We're proposing that if council directs us, we'll move forward on doing additional research, drafting a model service plan, drafting proposed regulations and the guidelines. So as an example, determining what is the most appropriate way to set the interest rate, which things should be there, and how they might fit. We think it's important that we bring this back to council in the fall, if this is the direction of council, because we do have a couple that are considering moving forward. We've expressed some concerns about those, but wanted to provide that guidelines. The other thing is we think that it makes a very public comment to all the existing metro districts of this is how we will look at metro districts when you come in for reauthorization or something else or amendment. So that concludes the staff presentation. Carl and I are both here to answer questions that council may have, but that's really what we're about today, is to just give you a sense of what the next steps are if this is something council wants us to pursue. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council.
Thank you so much, Mr. Romine. We'll go to questions from council next, starting with Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. thank you for bringing this forward. I think I've been calling for it since probably 2020. And you all have been such a great source of information for metro districts. And in fact, I remember even during COVID times, you would send us more information about how metro districts work and things like that. So I really appreciate all of the in-depth time. I am going to run out of time. I know I will. So I'll probably do a second round. I do have some questions. In generality, I want to support all of this. So best practice research and drafting a model service plan, by which all of the feedback over the course of the years that we've been giving back is important to us. And I know that you have been listening. I just have some questions about oversight, accountability, some of the finance issues, and then, maybe a little bit more into the finance, because I don't quite understand all of some of that was Chinese to me. So I was just thinking, like, do I really understand all of this about the finance portion of it? And how bonds work and things like that. So I just wanted to know, once this is adopted, do we have a plan or a thought on how to have them comply? So how do we enforce compliance? Have other areas really enforce compliance on this, or is this external to what we have control over?
Again, Mayor, council members, we can't force this on the existing 49.
Right.
And some of them are formed and not even in operation yet, but they are formed. So this is really about going forward. Once we put it in place, they must comply. Because that is part of what your authorization is and approval is that they must follow the procedures. So we think it's important because as we have these conversations, it lets them know what the guidelines are going to be. As far as the soft side of it, moral suasion is oftentimes something that's well used to create all kinds of positive outcomes. And we think this is important to be able to say it. So part of the conversations that Manager Hoffman and Carl and I and Nancy have about these when we're talking about whether we can object or not object is around some of that on the edges. And we think by having something from council to say this is the direction that we want to go, even for the existing ones, we'll be able to cite that as a reason. Doesn't mean we can overcome that original service plan. We can't, but it allows us to have a much more fixed sense of what the approach is that Broomfield wants to do to make sure these are effective parts of our development process.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And I know that we've had some instances, and I know Councilmember Anderson and I have worked a lot on these questions. We're both like, we have a lot of questions tonight. But I think, there's many times where we have overlaying special districts. So we have, I remember there was a business in our ward who was just complaining about how many special districts that they had. And that isn't necessarily metro districts, but it is other special districts. So they have like 7 different kinds overlapping, and then they feel like they're being taxed to death. So I'm curious, is there a way that we could ensure that taxpayers understand their metro district tax obligations in congruence with other overlaying special districts as well? And just to have some more clarity and more transparency in that, especially if they're between 60 to 80 mills. I don't know if there's a plan on that or how we can, incorporate this into the best practices.
Mayor Pro Tem and council members. So that is the tax bill that's issued each year that people do get. And they see it, even if their escrow is paying for it, you oftentimes get that bill directly sent to you with the notice, please don't pay this because your escrow is paying it. The second part of it is one of the things we were talking about within the administrative side is what kind of notification do you need, should they be doing each year? We think that is property taxes tend to be one of the most confusing taxes out there. And it's relatively large. And so as you know, as council knows, Manager Hoffman oftentimes likes to simplify it by saying roughly 25% of your property tax bill is what's paying the city and county of Broomfield. And that's pretty true. But as you can see, because the variability within the mill levies, it is substantially variant. In some cases, that mill levy is almost equal to 50% of the property tax bill. In other cases, it's relatively minor. So we think that would be an administrative part of the model service plan.
Okay.
Manager Hoffman, did you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay. Well, I saw you moving. I didn't like, that was like, please call on me, please call. Sorry.
He put you on the spot. That's okay.
You
No,
sound sick.
that's great. I do think that, I don't know how to go about this. So this is just sort of an idea of when we have new businesses coming in, you know, it sounds like they are notified of the mill levies as they move in. Is that correct?
They should be, it's probably part of their lease negotiation.
Okay.
But it's, you know, if you think about many people, if you bought a home, you had that stack of about 150 pages that you went through with your closing title company, and you signed and you signed and you signed. In there was a fair lending document, which also talked about what your tax levels are and things like that. Same is true for businesses, but it is something that's oftentimes missed. The other thing I would note is metro districts must have, like we do, a singular mill levy. But as an example, in Baseline, there are 9 metro districts, and so each one of them have a different mill levy. So if you're in Baseline, you don't always have the same mill levy as your neighbor who may be across the street in a different metro district. And in part because they're trying to encourage certain types of development by that method.
Okay, thank you. I do think that we need to figure out some way too, because I don't think this happens when people lease like their businesses from the property owner. I don't feel like there's enough communication too about how much they're being taxed per se. I don't know, maybe we can dive into that later, but I always feel like there isn't enough information. Like for instance, one business was just really curious how much they were spending on even, you know, snow removal and how equitable it was to others. And so I think, you know, there's just some confusion on that too, on what they're paying as part of the overall tax structure.
And
if
that's
they're
part of a
leasing.
triple net lease oftentimes, where they're paying both the taxes, the insurance, as well as those additional services.
I would like to see some more transparency if we can in that. I don't know if we can. And then, you know, I'm always hammering the thought that once you have a certain percentage of resident members within a certain time frame, you know, let's get them rolled on, and what does that look like? What sort of carrot, what sort of stick do we have in that instance as far
Right.
as best practices go?
Mayor Pro Tem, council members, you don't have a stick right now to require that. We don't really have a carrot either. We could put a stick into the model service plan to say that you must do this. However, in talking to various people that are leading metro districts, oftentimes those developers, they'll say, we try to recruit. I don't know how much they try or don't try. I can't speak to the quality of the effort. I can just say that they have informed us that they have tried to recruit people to run. But you could put things in there to say, as an example, you can't increase your debt from your original debt unless you have at least a certain percentage being residents.
Okay.
There are things you could do in the model service plan.
I think I would like that, and maybe we could match the resident percentage. Like, let's say you have a certain percentage that's already living there, and whether or not it's a business or not, you know, that should be represented. It's just taxation with representation to me. I don't know how that would actually pan out, but I do think we need to be more diligent about requiring, you know, resident representation. If they can't get someone, I can understand that, but I also know that some people say they've never heard of their metro district or run for their metro district. So yeah, the outreach, I think that I'm wondering if we could require, like, we require developers anyway to send out a letter right within a certain amount or distance. I feel like we could require that.
If
So
you could do that in the model service plan going forward, yes.
I would like that. And I know we're not giving total details tonight. I get that. So I have one more question. This just deals with the market rate interest rates and developers acting as lenders. Does competition like play a role in that, or can we ensure that, or no?
So as we've been working on the objections and or notifications related to refinancing and refunding of debt or other things, oftentimes we do talk about the interest rate and lean in a little bit with their team to make sure that we're paying attention to the interest rates. At this point, we do have regulations in some of them on what the maximum level is. And then in some cases, there can be a super level of interest if approved by the city and county manager and the city attorney. And that's in case interest rates take off, go to 8 or 9%. This wouldn't foreclose them. The reality is most metro districts, just like you do with your home, most districts may go out and issue debt, and if they can get an improved environment, they will oftentimes refinance it in order to get the lower interest rate, which can then allow them to expand the level of development or infrastructure improvements.
Okay, all right, thanks. That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I actually don't have a whole lot of questions, but I just want to, I have like 2 questions here, or maybe one more comments than anything. And I appreciate that comment about balance between the comprehensive approach and not being so overly burdensome that we deter people from following the metro districts, because I would want, it seems like more is better, but I appreciate that comment so that we don't become too overly burdensome. I think one of the things that I find to be most critical is the understanding of what you're buying into when you're getting into a metro district. So it's like kind of like conspicuous notice kind of piece that, I don't know, so we don't have any requirements right now, is that correct? To say like, this has to be obvious to you when you're signing your closing documents, that it's just buried in the pile of papers.
I'm looking at Carl, but I don't believe we have anything in any of the, we have not gone through line by line every service plan, but I don't believe that there's something that says, here's the additional notification you need to do when a new buyer comes in. So oftentimes these are the original buyers that are aware of it. But oftentimes not somebody that other than through the normal lending process and the normal disclosure process when you're buying a home, where all of those types of things are listed out.
So it'd be something that just seems to be most critical.
Not a super extra thing, no.
Yeah, okay, so that just seems to be the most critical thing of all, that this is, you're paying all this extra money for living here and this is what you're getting for it. So the only question I actually have, and I appreciate the approach, and I'm sure I'll have more questions when you come back with even more details. So I look forward to that. So I agree with all of this. But does this, a question came up yesterday from a constituent, and does this apply just to specifically metro districts, or would this apply to something that, like a park and recreation district, if that were to be presented? Is that would be outside the scope of this, correct?
Again, and I'm looking to Carl, but the original title, and I'm going to miss the title, I'm sorry about that, but Title 32, which is the establishment of special districts, it does include other districts. And what I don't know, and Nancy and Carl are both here, exactly what the council's role is for other districts beyond just the ones that we've worked on so far, which are JIDs, BIDs, and metro districts. I don't know if, as an example, a new park district were to be formed, what that process is, but I believe it's probably the same. Carl?
Good morning, Mayor, Council, Carl Front, Senior Attorney. So this presentation really was focused towards just metro districts. Under Title 32, there are other special districts that are there. But as you saw, like with the formation of the Business Improvement District, that had a different type, it didn't have a service plan, it had an operating plan and other requirements that have to come through. So they all vary a little bit by what they have, and that tonight we're just focused on metro districts.
Just metro districts.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, and that is all my questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem Shah.
Thank you, Mayor. So for the purpose of simplicity and the great risk of error, yes to all 4 of these bullet points.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Ward?
Thank you, Mayor. No questions, just yes to all of them. Thank you.
Love the brevity. And Councilmember Lim?
Yes, I had a question. So could you please give us specifics as far as, okay, if this goes forward, what is the application of this model service plan to our catalytic projects? So the big 4.
Right now, all 4 of them, well, 3 of them already have metro districts already set up. The 4th, which is the baseline, or the Flatirons Crossing area, does not have a specific metro district. And that was something that was chosen a long period of time ago. But the other 3 all have metro districts already formed, already in place.
Okay. And just to clarify, does a change in debt issuance by a metro district trigger compliance with this new service plan?
If they come in to amend a service plan, at that point, then we could require them to incorporate whatever we have in a model service plan. They may choose not to and stay with the existing service plan, but that's how it would work if they want to amend or adjust something. And there are all types of reasons why they may or may not want to do that. So I can't hypothesize what that might be, but it would apply only if they come in for an amendment.
Okay, thank you. And are there, in our conversations with metro districts lately, and development plans, there's been a lot of conversation about, well, who ended up with the ponds? Was it and we did staff seemed to do a lot of research with, okay, this pond, ended up in the maintenance of the city. This pond ended up in the maintenance of the developer. Is there any way to standardize, or would it be even desirable, I guess, to standardize any of that infrastructure post initial development maintenance? I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Mayor Pro Tem, council members. So in some cases where it's not defined, that's where that ambiguity comes, or where it's not as specifically defined as perhaps we'd all like. That's where those types of things sometimes sit. Initially, with many of them, it does call for what that's going to be. So the example would be related to the Metro District and the bid for the Broomfield Town Square as an example. We're very clear within the relationship exactly who's building, or I shouldn't say building, who is constructing the lake and developing the lake, et cetera, and then who will be maintaining the lake. So as you may recall in that particular case, the lake will be returned and the property will be returned to the city and county of Broomfield, because we'll be responsible for a number of elements of that. That is what you would normally expect, but there is sometimes ambiguity within this. And as city county manager introduced Maddie earlier tonight at the start of this, is one of the roles that Maddie's really doing is digging into this and other development agreements to just hone down and really kind of narrow those things down. We have a good sense of them all. We just want to get down to the, for lack of better, the dotting the i's and crossing the t's. And that's something that Maddie's taking on a major role for us.
So will there be something in this model service plan that will give guidance so that that ambiguity doesn't exist anymore?
Generally, I would say the answer to that question is yes. However, metro districts and developments are unique in their own way. And so somebody may want to put a fountain in and we may say, okay, that's all on you. And that's not something we have anywhere else in Broomfield. And I'm just using that as a hypothetical example, a waterfall fountain kind of thing. As Kyle Harris talked about earlier, they're going to put in a climbing wall. That's something that they'll be maintaining ownership of, or the Metro District will. It's not something that'll be reverting back to the city and county of Broomfield. So that's the one problem is every development likes to be unique. And so that's part of why we want to have a model service plan is that we were covering 90% and we're really dealing with that last 5% or 7%, whatever the number is.
Okay, thanks. Last question. So staff has in the memo that if they would like to move forward with this, I understand, to save time in the long run. But it also states that staff can do this within the existing framework of their duties. And you're looking for council direction on whether we want you to go forward with that. So I would like you to address, if we direct you to go forward with this within your already substantial duties, are you going to be setting anything else aside that we would have assumed was already going forward and won't be?
I will speak first, and I don't know if the person that tells me what I do every day wants to add to it, but the items that we have committed to City Council, at least for the work that I'm doing and the work that Carl and Maddie are doing, we fully intend to fulfill all those obligations and meet those deadlines. This is something that we've had on our list. Honestly, we were hoping to bring it to you earlier, but with some of the things that we've been able to accomplish this year, such as the refinancing or refunding of the debt related to Burr and some of those things, this is within the capabilities of what we're planning to do. Manager Hoffman, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Agreed.
Okay, great. Answers to the questions, yes to all four. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Yes to all four. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And we're going to go online. Hold that thought, Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Marshall-Shin.
Thank you, Mayor. My only question was answered. So thank you for that. And thank you for all the work you've done on this. Yes on all four.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Nguyen.
No questions. Yes, on all four.
All right, thank you. And Councilmember Cohen.
I have a couple questions.
Break it up.
Sorry to ruin
That's
the-
okay.
the flow, but if I understand what you're saying correctly, 49 of them are already formed. We can't really affect them going forward except in extraordinary circumstances. I don't know how many more there could potentially be at this point of build out in Broomfield. Not very many, certainly nowhere near 49. So what would be the real practical effect of having a model at this time? Any new going forward, we could apply some requirements, but it seems like, as I think Councilmember Henkel mentioned, there's many residents of these 49 who don't understand the metro districts or don't feel like there's enough transparency into decisions being made about debt and other things. So how could we best impact the 49 going forward that we'll have a model? It seems like the only way to really get them to follow it would be to get their boards to adopt it. Is that possible?
And Mayor Pro Tem, council members, Councilmember Cohen, you're right. I mean, in some senses, the 49 can ignore us if they want. I mean, they can't, but to some degrees for what this change is. But the reality is these are boards, and boards can adjust things. They can come to us and request for us to amend it, or they can adopt some of these ideas. And so whatever, if a number of residents were to go onto a board, they could begin to adjust that. They'll have to be careful as far as some of the debt requirements and with related to the bonds, but there are things. The real opportunity, there are some undeveloped areas within Broomfield that will likely be coming on in the next decade or two. Specifically, there's a part of Broomfield that's on the other side of I-25. There are no metro districts over there. So we suspect that is going to require metro districts at some point in the future. Another example that I would just point out to you is there's a development that is coming forward that's a small residential, roughly about just over 100 units. And they are proposing to put a metro district in. And we've already been talking to them following this kind of behavior. And so really what you may see actually is infill. In the infill metro districts where we're seeing redevelopment or something else where there wasn't anything before, and you're seeing that change, that may be how the infrastructure, because unfortunately for redevelopment, sometimes the infrastructure costs are pretty high. And so that's another example I would just point out. So it's not, our hands aren't tied in one way, but it could be a board saying, a future board of an existing metro district saying, these make sense to us, and we want to adopt those also, and they could do that.
Just as an aside, would something like Eagle Trace be a possibility for a metro district going forward to maintain that?
It may be an option that whoever owns that property may want to come forward, and it may be a way that some of that core infrastructure can be brought in.
So I guess what I'm going after is that if we really want to make a difference for the residents who are already with metro districts, I would want to emphasize transparency and how these boards are filled, because I don't think the developers are really recruiting other than the bare minimum notice, because there's no real incentive for them to have a bunch of residents on the board, quite honestly. So I'm a supporter of you going forward and would like to see a model, because obviously there's a reason to have a model, because I'm guessing these metros have quite a lot of variation in their current documents. But I would like to think that we could maybe apply pressure, or at least make every resident of these metro districts aware of the model district board we come up with. And especially if our model document includes very specific requirements like minimum turnout for elections that if you have an election and only 10% vote, it's not valid, which would incentivize them to make sure they reach every resident to be involved in the election, which would incentivize them to make, certain awareness requirements that you do have to contact every resident about an upcoming election and the opportunity to serve. Because I think a lot of people just never get, if they don't even know they're in a metro district, they obviously get notified that there was an election and they could serve. So as you go forward, I hope there's a lot of language to transparency and specific requirements of notification, adequate notification so that residents can get involved. Because then they can be empowered to change the regulations in their metro district. That's one scenario I think would be the most likely to affect a huge majority of our residents who live under them now. That was more of a statement, but one last question, real quick, that I'm just curious. I meant to email and ask you, the variation of tax level is tenfold from 8 to 80. What's the distinction? Who's at 8 and who's at 80, and what's the driving factor to make it such a huge disparity?
So speaking of transparency, the assessor for the city and county of Broomfield publishes all the mill levies and all of that every year, comes to council, as you know, also, which for your approval in December. So there is some transparency, but if somebody wanted to look at this, the assessor's abstract, you can see what that variation is and where those are. Sometimes the names are a little oblique and you kind of have to think about where it is. We actually have maps on right now on the city's website that shows what each of these districts are and where their geographies are and also what their debt levels are. It's something that we do think we're going to try to improve a little bit more on the transparency, but the reality is that is where it is. As far as in some cases, if there's a very small level of infrastructure that need to be built, that may be why it's at 15 or 10 or 30. When there's a higher degree of infrastructure, that tends to be those 50s and 60s and in the case of the 80s. And so it's amenity rich causes those mill levies to be much higher. And some of the things that are being brought forward is that richness of amenities, and those oftentimes are being funded through the Metro District and through those mills by those residents and those businesses within the area. So I hopefully think that answers the question.
Thank you.
I'm not trying to be political. I'm just saying that
No,
I can't point out each one.
Well, I live in the Broadlands and it's a 20-year-old plus community and our mill levy's down to 10. So it's gone down as the debt has been paid off, as they should, right? You're supposed to see them go down. And we're not, I wouldn't even say we're amenity rich, but you get what you pay for, right? If you have a lovely clubhouse with all kinds of special recreation opportunities or a water park, your mill levies are going to be higher. We don't have that. So just a basic pool. And so I'll go back to Councilmember Henkel.
I won't inundate us with all the rest of my questions. I'll just send them to you. But my last one was just an addendum to what Councilmember Cohen was alluding to, is that we received the emails too, and I'm always trying to look through the emails as to when their election was, who was voted in, do they have anyone that's new? Are there any open, like any vacancies? And I'm always just curious about that all the time. And then I forward it to like the HOA president so that they're aware. And sometimes they're not aware of what's happening on their mill levies. And in fact, like our mill levies in McKay, they actually lowered the mill levies because our housing prices, like my house has doubled in price. So I will say I would love to pie in the sky a couple years from now, see, and I appreciate the transparency, but like on the dashboard, including not only the levies, the debt status, development progress though, and also public meeting info or any elections. If we could have eventually, a couple years from now, having a dashboard that would just reflect that easily for people. Because it's very confusing even for me when I'm going through all of their information. I feel like that would be really helpful for people to know. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other feedback from council? Remotely, y'all good? Did you get a good direction?
Mayor, I did, and we will come back. Once we work with the city manager, we'll figure out a timing for this, but it will be likely be coming back in fall 2025. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you all so much. So that concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Is there any other business to come before the council from my colleagues or staff? Seeing none, The study session is adjourned. Thank you.